Again, it's a red stick.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the C++ tutorial series. In today's video we're going to talk about loops, so let us get right into it. Alright, so loops are just basic programming structures that allow us to execute the same block of code repeatedly, either as long as a certain condition is met or a specific amount of times. We have different types of loops for that. We have two major different types and a third different type, which is actually just a slight variation of the first one. And the first one that we're going to talk about is the while loop, and it's initialized with the keyword while followed by a condition. We already know what conditions are: expressions that result in a Boolean value, so either true or false. This can be a Boolean value itself, so either true or false. This can be a function that returns a Boolean. This can be a comparison, whatever we want, as long as it results in a Boolean. It is a condition. It can be stated inside of those parentheses here. And as long as this condition inside of those parentheses returns true, we're going to execute this code over and over and over again. So in this case, this would go on forever. This would never stop, because while true, obviously true is always true. It's not going to change. It's a constant, a Boolean constant. We're going to execute the code here over and over and over again. But we can also go ahead with a slightly different example here. We can go ahead and say int I, and then we can say std cin I, so we're getting the user input, saving it into I. And then what we can do is we can say while I is larger than 0, greater than 0, we're going to say std cout I, and then we're going to decrease I by 1. So we're going to say, or actually we can go ahead and do this directly in here. So we can say I minus minus. Notice again that I minus minus means that we're printing I as it is, and then we're decreasing it by 1, not the other way around. So we're not doing this, we're doing I minus minus. And essentially what this does is the user inputs a number, and as long as this number is positive, we're decreasing it and printing the value. So we're doing some sort of countdown here. By the way, I need to turn off my antivirus system, because otherwise whenever I compile C++ code, it's turning on. I don't know why. Then we can go ahead, compile this, and I can input a number here. Let's say I go with 8, and as you can see, it says 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We could also go ahead to 0 if we want. So we can either go ahead and print, if we don't want to decrease it further, but we want to print the value when it reaches 0, we can go ahead and say cout I at the end again. Because if you just go ahead and say larger or equal to 0, you can print 0, but it's going to end up as minus 1, as negative 1. So in this case, it will still be 0 in the end, but it will also be printed. So we can go ahead now with 30, and you can see it does the full countdown up until 0, or down until 0. So this is the basic while loop, how it works. Now, before we get to the second major type of loop, we're going to cover a slight variation of the while loop, and this is the so-called do while loop. So in this case, we say do, specify the block of code, the loop code essentially, and then we add a while in the end. So we do it like that, and we can do the same thing actually. And the difference here is that we check for the condition after the first iteration. So this means that no matter what the condition is, we're going to execute this block of code at least once. So in this case, we can do the same thing. We can say std cout I minus minus std endline. And this code will be executed here even if we start with a number that is below 0, which otherwise would not happen in an ordinary while loop, because the condition gets checked immediately and you don't even enter the loop if the condition is not true. In this case, we do it at least once, and then if the condition is still met, we can do it as long as the condition is met. But we're going to do it at least once. This is the do while loop, and we can check it out. So I can go ahead first and enter a valid number like 10, and you can see it works like the while loop. But now if I go ahead and enter something like negative 9, you can see that it prints negative 9 at least once. It also decreases it. We can check that this is true by just printing the value of I in the end. So you can see that it's still, or not still, actually it's going to be negative 10 if I enter negative 9, as you can see. But it doesn't continue or it doesn't repeat the code over and over again. It does it one time because it has to do it one time, even if that condition is false. We can check that by saying while false. So even if the condition is definitely false, 100% false, it's going to execute this code at least once, no matter what I put in. So 10, it's going to say 10. And then afterwards 9, because it's decreased, of course. So this is the difference. If we do a while loop, we're going to check for the condition immediately. A do while loop, we're going to execute the code once, and after that, we're going to check for the condition. So you can imagine it to be like doing this for sure one time, and then we can start with a new ordinary while loop. This is the same thing. So the second major loop type that we're going to look at is called the for loop, and it's initialized with the keyword for, followed by parentheses, the loop head, or header, so to say. Then we have the block of code where we do something. And inside of the head or the header of the for loop, what we specify are three things. First of all, a control variable. This can be a variable that was defined in the program before. So we can say int I here, and we just have to initialize it here, saying I equals 10 or something like that. Or we can say int I directly in there. So we can go ahead here and say int I equals 0. The second thing that we specify after the semicolon here, we specify a condition which says do this or execute this block of code as long as this condition is met. So this is something that we already know from the while loop. Stuff like, or something like I is less than 100. And then an action that is happening with each iteration. So something like I++. In this case, what we do is we create a variable starting at 0. And as long as this variable is below 100, we're increasing it by 1 and executing the code inside of this loop here. So for example, we could just go ahead and say std_cout hello, and what this will do is it will print hello 100 times. Like that. We can go ahead and see what happens. You can see it prints hello 100 times. We can also go ahead and print I, of course, because I is a variable that is, if we define it here like that, int I equals 0, it's valid or accessible in the scope of that loop. Of course, we cannot access I here, so this is not valid. We cannot find a variable I in here. It only exists in the loop, which is also the reason why we can define it here again. So this is not a violation of any rules. And if we do that, we can see it's the same thing like counting. We can also start at 100, for example, and say as long as it's larger than 100, we're going to decrease it by 1. And then it's more like a countdown. What's happening here? Why didn't it work? It's 100 less than, oh, greater than 0. Sorry, not greater than 100. And then it works like a countdown, as you can see. So the major difference here is that we specify in the for loop more in the header. It's more used for counting and iterating. So when we get to collections, to lists, to arrays, and so on, we're going to use more for loops, whereas while loops are actually, if you want to do something like as long as I don't get a trigger, as long as some boolean is not true or not false actually, as long as something is met, let me do this. If you want to have that kind of loop, you're going to use a while loop. And if you want to count, if you want to iterate, if you want to do something a certain amount of times, you're going to use the for loop. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting the like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell if you don't want to miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video and bye.